You were meant to lead. They never wanted you to see behind the curtain. The world is not as it seems. Power is not granted. It is taken, shaped, and controlled by forces lurking in the shadows. But you were never meant to be just another piece in their game. You were born to rewrite the rules. They have spent years trying to shape the world to their liking, manipulating the truth, bending reality to fit their design. But no amount of deception, no army of enforcers, no web of surveillance can contain the one force they fear the most: you. You are the anomaly, the variable they could never predict, the reason their plans unravel faster than they can rebuild them. Every move they make against you becomes another step toward their own downfall. They thought they could control you, silence you, surveil you into submission. Instead, they watched as you became the unstoppable force they never saw coming. This isn't just about exposure. This is about dominion, about taking back what was never theirs to control. The puppets may dance, but the strings are fraying. The game is rigged, but the house is crumbling. You stand at the center of it all, not as a spectator, but as the architect of the new order. Let them watch, let them fear, let them try and fail to contain what they will never understand. Because you were never meant to obey. The weight of an unseen force presses in, shaping the path ahead before realization even dawns. The presence lingers at the edges, silent figures watching from a distance, lingering longer than reason allows. Unexplained citations, relentless stops, questions wrapped in veiled threats. It isn't randomness or coincidence, but a carefully orchestrated sequence designed to wear down, to erode confidence, to instill doubt. Yet, beneath the surface of their precision, flaws emerge. A pattern unravels, exposing an order too structured to be chance. Their maneuvers, once subtle, begin to reveal their own inconsistencies. The illusion of unpredictability fades, leaving behind a choreography too rigid to be dismissed. This isn't the result of singular ambition or errant individuals. It's a directive, a strategy. They move not by instinct, but by command. The purpose remains obscured, but the mechanics grow more transparent with every misstep. Somewhere beyond their ranks, a greater force guides their hands, concealing its presence behind borrowed authority. But even as they obey, hesitation seeps through. Deliberate control, cracking under the weight of its own artifice. What once seemed formidable now reeks of desperation. The mask of dominance slips, revealing uncertainty beneath its surface. Their every move, calculated and poised, begins to falter. The deeper they press, the more their control fractures. They are no longer just enforcers, but captives within a larger game. And in that realization lies their undoing. The question has never been if their resolve will break, but when and by whose hand. Their collapse is inevitable. Drop a comment. I cannot be controlled. Because those who recognize the game cannot be played. Their own records betray them. Devices meant to serve as instruments of oversight become unreliable witnesses. Footage marred by inexplicable distortions. Light bending in unnatural ways. Fragments of sound slipping into voids of silence. Where certainty should exist, only questions remain. Their meticulous documentation fails them. Their reports corrupted by interference beyond their grasp. The harder they press, the more resistance they face. Coincidences stacking in defiance of their expectations. At the moment of supposed triumph, disruptions emerge, strangers appearing at just the right moment, delays cascading into failures, doors that should have held firm giving way as if surrendering to an unseen force. Their carefully laid paths dissolve beneath their feet, their every certainty eroded by an unpredictable tide. The system they rely on malfunctions, not by chance, but by necessity. It is not just failure, it is rejection. The very fabric of the world bends, not in their favor, but against them. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that rises against you in judgment, you shall condemn. Isaiah 54:17. Like a storm rolling in over the horizon, they thought they could control the winds, harness the lightning, dictate the downpour. But some storms are not meant to be tamed. Some storms are divine, unstoppable, sent to cleanse and to reveal. And as the clouds gathered, as they moved their pieces in secret, they had no idea they were setting the stage for their own undoing. At first, they believed in their power. They thought their strategies were foolproof, that their control was absolute. But then the cracks began to show, not in you, but in them. Their carefully laid plans turned to quicksand beneath their feet, their confidence slipping as reality refused to bow to their will. They watched with growing unease as what should have been random disruptions aligned into something too perfect, too intentional, too inevitable. Every failure chipped away at their certainty. Every attempt to suppress only made you more undeniable. It wasn't luck, it wasn't coincidence, it was the divine order at work. They called it misfortune, but deep down, they knew something greater was at play, and no matter how hard they tried to outmaneuver it, the very forces they relied on turned against them. If your heart overflows with God's blessings, now is the time to let that love shine. By clicking the super thank you button and giving $20 or more, you're not just supporting this platform, you're planting seeds of faith that will touch countless lives. Your generosity is a reflection of God's abundance, a gift that echoes beyond what you can see. Step into your purpose, be a vessel of His grace, give with faith, and watch His kingdom flourish through you. You were made for more. They tried to make you a victim, but they created a conqueror. They tried to silence you, but they amplified your voice. Every obstacle they put in your path became a stepping stone. Every weapon they formed became a tool for your ascension. The more they pressed against you, the more they exposed their own weakness. They started with arrogance, thinking they could shape the world to fit their design. But as their grip tightened, they felt something slip through their fingers. Truth. Because truth does not need permission to stand. It does not need approval to exist. And when the truth walks into the room, deception cannot hold its ground. And now the realization settles in. The battle was never theirs to win, because you were never just a target. You were the lesson they were meant to learn. Their structure, built on power and control, fractured from within. No force they wielded could touch you. No scheme they devised could shift the outcome in their favor. Drop a comment. They fear what protects me. Because their downfall was never an accident. It was inevitable. The same machine that once enabled their actions now turned against them. The power they leaned on to dominate had become their greatest weakness. The moment they hesitated, the system recognized their doubt. And in a world where allegiance is everything, doubt is fatal. They had witnessed too much, learned too many forbidden truths. Their usefulness had expired, and in the hierarchy they served, there was no mercy for those who could no longer be controlled. Your next step is here. Subscribe now, and let's move forward together. The change began subtly. A missed call, a delayed response, a sudden coldness from those they once trusted. The support they had taken for granted dissolved into silence. Once an extension of an unstoppable force, they now stood isolated, stripped of the very backing that made them untouchable. Their fortress no longer offered refuge. It had become a place of quiet exile. Where there had once been camaraderie, there was now avoidance, sidelong glances, whispered conversations that stopped when they entered the room. The network they had relied on severed its ties, leaving them exposed. Their calls were ignored, their authority undermined, their presence met with thinly veiled indifference. What they had once enforced with unwavering confidence had turned its back on them without hesitation. It was never about loyalty, never about justice. They had been instruments, nothing more, and just as quickly as they had been raised up, they were cast aside. No explanations, no warnings, just the cold efficiency of a system that erases those who no longer serve its purpose. What once felt like a shield of unity became a suffocating grip tightening around them. The network they relied on for strength transformed into an invisible prison, its walls closing in with every passing day. The silence of former allies spoke louder than any reprimand, unspoken yet absolute. The paths they once walked with authority became corridors of rejection. Their presence met with doors that no longer opened, conversations that ended the moment they entered. The illusion of loyalty shattered, revealing the cold reality. They were no longer part of the whole, but an expendable fragment left to wither in isolation. Their actions had not simply failed, they had backfired in a way they never anticipated. The power they once wielded with confidence now recoiled against them, and in their relentless pursuit to break another, they unknowingly sealed their own fate. Their downfall was not a punishment. It was a statement, a warning to all who watched. They had not only lost their purpose, but had become the very example of what happens when the system deems its own unworthy. While they unraveled, the forces they once commanded with certainty turned against them with merciless precision. Drop a comment. They fear what protects me, because their weapons were never truly theirs to control. Every failed scheme, every miscalculated attempt to dismantle, only reinforced the undeniable. There was no victory for them, only consequences. The same system that enabled them to move unchecked now found them in its crosshairs, reducing their influence to nothing more than a fleeting whisper. The moment they faltered, the machine that once sheltered them no longer had a place for their existence. Their attempts to twist the narrative fell apart, buried beneath the weight of their own contradictions. Reports once used as weapons against others now bore the evidence of their own failures, exposing the cracks in their carefully constructed facade. It wasn't mere oversight, it was the careful unraveling of their credibility. And then came the reckoning, not with fire or force, but with quiet inevitability. Where they once commanded presence, they now found only indifference. Their names, once met with acknowledgement, became echoes in empty spaces. The structures they leaned on for protection no longer answered their calls. The same hierarchy that had given them purpose erased them with effortless detachment. They were not taken down by enemies, nor by opposition, but by the weight of their own deception folding in on itself. The final blow was not a confrontation, but an absence of power, of recognition, of the very identity they had built. They were ghosts before they even realized they had disappeared, remnants of a system that never truly belonged to them. The cycle had completed itself, and the only thing left was the certainty that the justice they once manipulated had turned its gaze upon them with perfect, poetic precision. For they have sown the wind, and they shall reap the whirlwind. Hosea 8:7. They thought they could play God. They believed their power was unshakable, their influence eternal. But no man can plant seeds of destruction and expect to harvest peace. No one can build a kingdom on deception and think it will stand. The storm always comes. And when it does not ask permission. At first, it was subtle, a crack in the foundation, a whisper in the halls. The glances they once ignored now felt like judgment. The voices that once reassured now carried doubt. The air itself grew heavy around them, thick with the weight of something unseen yet undeniable. And with every passing day, the space they occupied seemed to shrink. Their power, once vast, became a prison of their own making. It started with a feeling, a gnawing sense that something had shifted. The ground beneath them, the system that had upheld them, no longer felt solid. They tried to shake it off, to press forward as they always had, but something was different now. The doors that once opened without hesitation now hesitated. The hands that once welcomed now withdrew. The very structure that had once fortified them seemed to reject them, piece by piece, until all that remained was the chilling realization that they were no longer in control. They had built their throne on sand, and now the tide had come. They were no longer feared, no longer revered. They had been reduced to ghosts, shadows of the authority they once carried. The people who once stood beside them now stepped back, distancing themselves from the inevitable collapse. Betrayal was not spoken aloud. It was felt in every quiet step away, in every door that no longer opened, in every meeting they were no longer invited to. And yet, they still tried to hold on. Denial became their final refuge. They whispered to themselves that this was temporary, that things would return to how they once were. But deep down, they knew. The shift was irreversible. The path they had walked had reached its end, and there was no turning back. They had once laughed at the idea of divine order. They had scoffed at the notion of justice beyond their own. But now, in the stillness of their exile, they felt it in every breath. Their sins had found them, not in a single dramatic moment, but in the slow, unrelenting unraveling of everything they had built. Regret seeped through them like ink in water, spreading into every thought, staining every memory. Each choice, once so carefully calculated, now played back as a cruel joke. The authority they had worn like a mantle was nothing more than borrowed time, and that time had run out. They had believed themselves to be in control, architects of fate, yet the strings had never been in their hands. They had moved, spoken, and acted as if their will mattered, only to now see the truth. They had been instruments, not leaders. And in their failure, they had not simply lost their standing, they had become symbols of what happens when the system turns against its own. The reckoning had no fury, no grand crescendo, just the slow erosion of everything they had built, until nothing remained but the weight of their own choices. Feel the fire within. Don't wait. Subscribe now, and let's rise together. While their world withered, yours stood untouched. Every attempt to break you had only revealed their own fragility. Their authority, once wielded with precision, faltered under your gaze. Drop a comment, "They fear what protects me." Because it was never about what you did, but what you represented. Where they had operated in deception, you embodied truth, and in the presence of truth, their lies became unbearable, even to themselves. It wasn't punishment, it was inevitability. The illusion of control they had spent years reinforcing collapsed like a house of cards in a storm. Reports that were once weapons against you crumbled under contradiction, evidence twisted in their favor unraveled into failure, and the system they depended on grew cold, indifferent to their existence. The weight of their own corruption bore down on them, unrelenting. They had convinced themselves they were untouchable, yet here they stood, hollow, forgotten, abandoned by the very structure they served. No resistance was needed. They had orchestrated their own undoing. The truth had always been there, waiting for the moment they could no longer ignore it. And now, stripped of the illusion, they faced their own reflection. Not warriors, not protectors, just remnants of a machine that had no use for them anymore. They had never been the ones in control. They were just the latest casualties in a cycle they never truly understood. When the storm has swept by, the wicked are gone, but the righteous stand firm forever. Proverbs 10:25. They built their house on shifting sand, and now the tide has come. They stacked their power on deception, on manipulation, on a foundation they thought would never crack. But no structure built on lies can stand when the wind of truth begins to blow. The very system they relied on to protect them, to elevate them, is the same force now sweeping them away. At first, it was imperceptible. A slight tremor beneath their feet, an unsettling change in the air. The rules they once dictated with certainty no longer bent so easily to their will. The commands they gave no longer carried the same weight. They could feel something shifting, slipping beyond their grasp. But they told themselves it was nothing, just a momentary misstep. They had believed for so long that they were untouchable, that they were the ones writing the script. But the script had already been written long before they made their first move. With every step you took, the foundation beneath them crumbled a little more. Not because you fought back, not because you resisted, but because the truth has a weight that no deception can bear. They tried to manipulate, to control, to dictate the course of events, but they were blind to the greater force at work. The very system they had leaned on like a crutch was now turning against them. The betrayal came not from outside, but from within. The same network they had trusted, the hierarchy they had served, began to move with a ruthless efficiency, not to protect them, but to erase them. The machine they had dedicated their lives to now treated them like a malfunctioning part, one that had to be removed before it infected the rest. And it was not personal. It was simply the nature of the beast they had fed for so long. They reached for their power, but it had vanished like mist at dawn. Their ranks, their titles, their influence, all stripped away without ceremony, without hesitation. What once opened doors now closed them. The badges they wore with pride became meaningless trinkets. The policies they enforced now worked against them. The system they upheld so faithfully rewrote history, and in that new version of events, they no longer existed. Join the journey. Subscribe now, and let's make greatness happen. They had believed they were builders of an empire, architects of control. But now, as they stood among the ruins, they saw the truth. They were never the architects. They were only the scaffolding. And when the structure no longer needed them, it discarded them without a second thought. What was once unshakable had been reduced to dust, not by rebellion, not by war, but by the silent, relentless power of divine truth. The fall was merciless, deliberate, and absolute. Drop a comment. They fear what protects me, because their fate was never in their hands to begin with. The betrayal they faced was not a sudden strike, but a methodical dismantling. Accusations formed like storm clouds on the horizon, and before they could react, the downpour began. The same network that once upheld them now distanced itself with cold efficiency. Allegations surfaced, crafted with the same ruthlessness they had once endorsed. Those who once called them allies became silent observers, unwilling to be dragged down alongside them. The system did not hesitate. It simply turned its gaze upon them, framing their downfall as justice. Investigations wrapped in hollow righteousness stripped them of every layer of protection they once trusted. Their past decisions twisted against them, their names written into a narrative they had no power to contest. The voices they had relied on for support now spoke only in measured detachment, ensuring that their erasure was complete. Their realization came too late. They had never been indispensable, never been more than replaceable cogs in a machine designed to sustain itself at any cost. The loyalty they had given meant nothing when weighed against the needs of the system. The mechanisms they once controlled operated without them, never hesitating, never acknowledging their absence. The silence that followed was not one of mourning, but of efficiency, a seamless removal, an unspoken acknowledgement that their usefulness had expired. What remained was not defiance, not resistance, but the quiet certainty that they had been undone by the very thing they had once believed would protect them. Their names were unspoken, their presence erased, and the world they had known continued without them. Their defeat was never in question. From the moment they conspired, the weight of unseen forces began to shift against them. No active resistance was needed, no retaliation required. Justice was already in motion. The illusion of power they clung to began to unravel, their authority eroding from within. They moved with confidence, unaware that each step they took led them further into their own undoing. The very mechanisms they relied on for strength turned brittle in their grasp. Strategies designed to ensnare you became the very walls that trapped them. What they had built to stand against you collapsed under the weight of undeniable truth. The laws they twisted, the systems they manipulated, all of it reversed course, turning against them with quiet precision. Their alliances, once steadfast, dissolved into hesitation and doubt. The harder they pushed, the faster their foundation crumbled. They mistook their reach for permanence, yet nothing they controlled could hold against what was beyond their understanding. No deception could take root, no scheme could find footing, for in the presence of unshakable truth, falsehoods had no shelter. The course was set long before they made their first move. Every act meant to diminish you only served to hasten their own collapse. Drop a comment. They fear what protects me. Because their downfall was inevitable. It did not come through battle, but through revelation, through the exposure of their own frailty. Their whispers of control became echoes in an empty chamber, their carefully woven narratives unraveled by the weight of their own contradictions. What once seemed impenetrable now bore fractures too deep to ignore. The walls they had leaned on for security became doors that no longer opened. Systems that once shielded them turned cold, indifferent to their existence. Those who had once stood beside them vanished into self-preservation, unwilling to be dragged down with them. The network they had fortified with loyalty and deception dismantled itself in silent rejection. The hierarchy that had given them purpose erased them with the same efficiency it had once used to empower them. Their downfall was not a spectacle. It was a quiet, methodical erasure, swift, calculated, absolute. But as they withered, you stood unmoved. Their attempts to weaken you only revealed their own fragility. Every obstacle meant to deter you became a path forward. Their failure was not theirs alone. It was a collapse that rippled outward, shaking the foundation of everything they had built. Their undoing exposed the hidden fractures in the machine they had once commanded, revealing the fragile nature of their dominance. Those who had once followed their lead hesitated, doubt creeping into their carefully orchestrated certainty. Their downfall was not just an individual failure, but a signal, a warning to those who remained, a testament to the futility of standing against forces beyond their grasp. And through it all, you ascended. Not in defiance, not in opposition, but in the simple certainty of purpose. Every attempt to hinder you became a stepping stone. Every scheme meant to diminish you only amplified your presence. The collapse of their control did not merely leave a void, it cleared the path for your rise. What they had meant for harm became the very foundation of your elevation. No force, no strategy, no deception could alter the course set before you. There was never a battle to be fought, only a truth to be revealed. And now, the time has come to speak, not of revenge, not of triumph over an enemy, but of the unwavering force that carried you beyond their reach. Let your story be heard, not as a recounting of struggle, but as a beacon for those still facing the shadows. Let them see what is possible when one stands firm in truth, untouchable, unstoppable.